Miami won 48-33 over then number 23 Texas A&M. Miami moves up to number 22 in the AP poll, 2-0 on the season. They now have the tied for the fourth best odds in the ACC. They came into the season sixth. So David, simply put, do you believe in Miami as an ACC contender?
Yeah, so I'm going to get in the weeds a little bit and be a wordsmith on defining contender. I think it's fair to say yes. I do think Miami can be an ACC contender this year. To me, though, that's separate than do I think Miami can win the ACC? I think that's a different conversation. But is Miami good enough to get to the ACC championship game, which makes them an ACC contender? I do think they can be right in that hunt. I think Miami can be that, potentially second team. I think it's fair to say Florida State to me looks like the class of the league right now through only 2 weeks. Plenty of season to go, so we'll see how that plays out. But I think Miami's right in the mix with, second, third, fourth level team of the ACC, along with North Carolina, Clemson. And I think Miami's kind of right there. We'll see if they can sustain the success they showed against Texas A&M. But I do think it's fair to say that they can be in contention for getting to the ACC championship game, which is not something I thought I would be saying after the Texas A&M game when fall camp started.
And certainly we had doubts about Miami's team. We've also learned more about the other ACC teams, particularly Clemson, which to me came into the year Clemson, Florida State, and certainly you could still think highly of Clemson. But I think with what we've seen through the 2 weeks, particularly that opener against Duke, they looked terrible, and Duke looked really good coming off a good year last year. I told you coming into the year, I said this to other people, I like Duke's team. I did not like Duke's schedule. They do have a tough schedule this year. To answer the question, do I believe in Miami as an ACC contender? Look, I think without question, Florida State is the clear-cut favorite in the ACC, and I see it essentially the same way that you're talking about with what they did last year, with what they did already this year. Clearly, 2 weeks in, they're the number one team. The betting favorites have them. Sometimes, with the way the betting, looking at different lines, you actually have to put up more than 100 to get your 100 over 100 back. So anyways, Florida State highly favorite, but without question, the way the other teams have looked, I think North Carolina, I thought a little bit higher of them as well. They've not looked particularly great. I know the Walker situation is certainly makes their offense, at least so far, look a little bit different too. So I think Miami is in contention for that number 2 spot with a lot of teams. I think a lot of teams are in that number 2 spot, which again, I thought Clemson was the clear cut number 2 going into it. I touched on Duke, North Carolina, they're in it. There's other teams too. Syracuse off to a 2-0 start. They're not a team that you would necessarily think about would be in there. But certainly those other teams as well. Looking at Louisville, they got that ACC win at Georgia Tech to start it off. So, and I know people still like Louisville. They're kind of an interesting team. We haven't really gotten to know Jack Plummer at quarterback. So yes, I think Miami, a big group of teams are going to be in contention there for that number 2 spot, the way it looks right now. And I think the key for Miami, the key for all these teams, but the key for Miami is navigating the season week in and week out. They still have a lot to prove, but certainly there's a lot of reasons to be excited after that win.
I think to that point, what maybe gives me pause with Miami in terms of going all in and being like, yeah, I think Miami's going to make the ACC championship game is the depth. And, that goes to your point about navigating a season. I think injuries and attrition is of course, part of the game and how a team deals with those situations when you have to dip into your depth a little bit can, potentially derail a season if things go poorly in that regard. And, look, if we're talking about just like pure starters or rotational players for Miami against Clemson or North Carolina, I think Miami can make those competitive games and potentially win those games. But if by the time Miami gets to those games, they're missing some key guys, I just think with where we're at right now in the Mario Cristobal era and the trajectory, it's only year 2. I don't know if the depth is quite where it needs to be. And so when you're crossing your fingers, kind of hoping for some good injury luck, I think it's tough to say strongly, yes, I think Miami can make the ACC championship game, but just pure top level starter talent, I think Miami's good enough to be right there. So, and to your point as well, with navigating a season, I think that can be said of Clemson, who has championship pedigree, right? They do know how to navigate a season. Now, I agree, like that things do look wobbly there. But if I was going to bet one way or another, I do think Clemson will figure things out and improve from this kind of poor start. And North Carolina, they have that quarterback in Drake May, who you never bet against. You always want to ride with that type of guy. So navigating a season is going to be what this boils down to with where Miami's at right now in this Mario Cristobal era.
And it looked like, if we're talking about what kind of record it's going to take, maybe a 6-2 team will be good enough to get, so I think tiebreakers might play into it, but maybe a 6-2 team can get into that second spot if the leader's 8-0 or 7-1, or maybe we're going to see, one loss team. So certainly, again, without the divisions, it makes things certainly very interesting. That's why I touched so much on a Duke team, for example, with their schedule. The schedules look a little bit different for certain teams going through this. The thing is, too, with Miami, there's a lot to be excited about. Look, if Miami scores 48 points every game and throw for that much, it's going to go well. Look, with what we saw last year, with just the way the seasons go, way college football works, you're not always at your best. You're not always turning in those kind of performances. And I know Miami has so many struggles last year all over the place, but at home, they lost 5 straight home games. They were better on the road. Going on the road is still tough, regardless of the results. So Miami saw some tough road games in conference at North Carolina, NC State, and then obviously at Florida State. So those are 3 tough games, and winning on the road. And, and one of the things too, David, that we've seen over the years of covering this team is essentially how you handle success. And I know Mario Cristobal is going to be dealing with that with this team, and not this week. They'll be fine this week, obviously. But, just moving forward, they're going to get more attention. They're now in the polls, which is great to see. It's always good seeing Miami in the top 25, first time since September of last year. So I think that's always a big thing once you start getting a target on your back. I think one of I don't know about the easiest thing in sports, but coming in as an underdog, us against the world mentality, I think is much different than expected to win. And I think, that will be something with this team, with all teams that want to have success. Once you start building week after week, you're starting to get a lot more attention. You have to deal with that either internally or just in general with where your whole team is at as you kind of try to win standings. There's more pressure as you keep winning. So we'll see. But certainly Miami's off to a great start. And we're not trying to pump the brakes too much on this win, because I know we both we both certainly had our doubts with this one, but with what the results, and I think also too from week one, we both were, there was a lot to like about that first week, and I know last year Miami would win sometimes and it wouldn't look great. So 2-0, it's great. I know the players are excited. Fans obviously should be excited too with what they've seen so far.
Yeah, maintaining that chip on your shoulder, even when you are winning, is a huge key to success in college football. Look, guys are getting paid nowadays with NIL and all that, but these guys still aren't pros, right? They're not professional football players. They're still 18 to 22-year-old young men that, distractions happen. They're not pro mentality type of guys. And so maintaining that chip on your shoulder is a huge key to success in college football. We saw that against Texas A&M, how Miami just kept swinging after a slow start, sloppy first quarter. Miami came out and kept swinging, kept coming. That's the type of approach Miami needs to have throughout the season. And if you have that approach, the results will be the results, and you feel good about the way you fight. And sometimes it just boils down to not quite having enough talent to pull off the result. But the approach needs to never change.
And looking ahead to Miami's schedule again, Bethune-Cookman at home on Thursday, so it's their 3rd straight home game to start the year. Then they go at Temple in 10 days after that, 9 days after that, actually, but at Temple. And then they get a break, and then they start ACC play. So 4 non-conference games to start off. Essentially, the football purist of college football likes that. I think we kind of like how non-conference at the beginning. I know certain schedules and certain teams do it differently, but then Miami, 8 straight, they go 8 in a row there. In conference, starting with, Georgia Tech back at home, and obviously the big one at North Carolina there. And I know it's easy for everybody to kind of look at that North Carolina game, but, Georgia Tech's playing well right now with the new coach is now settled in after stepping in last year. They're doing okay. So we'll see. And certainly the one thing we talk about, David, when we talk about navigating through a season, it's also, how you're playing at the time and getting better, and I know one thing that clearly this is going to happen now. You put stuff on film, and now other teams know what Miami wants to do with their new coordinators and vice versa. So now that teams actually know with what Miami wants to do, and Miami's going to have to adjust and readjust, and it goes both ways. And that's what we're talking about with navigating the season. As you mentioned, some of the distractions that can always pop up, or injuries, or whatever it might be, attention or doubts and whatever it might be. Again, not playing your best one day, how do you navigate through that? How do you maybe it's a road game, maybe it's not a big game, how do you find a way, finding a way. Again, everything can go well when you put up 48 and you look great and you do that every time out. Sports doesn't work that way. You're not always at your best. You have to find a way to perform, certainly in college football, because there's a lot of things that go on.
Yeah, dealing with adversity is a big deal, not only in games. We saw how Miami dealt with adversity against Texas A&M and how that was different than what we saw last year a lot of times in individual games. Hopefully that is also the trend for an entire season, because last season Miami was poor at dealing with adversity. We will find out how Miami is in that regard over the course of an entire season here moving forward.